Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and this morning we're visiting with Lori Wildenberg, author of Messy Journey, How Grace and Truth Offer the Prodigal a Way Home. Lori, welcome to the program.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Eric.
Well, you're very, very welcome. Lori is passionate about coming alongside men and women to encourage, support, and empower them to be the moms and dads they want to be. She connects with her audience using her natural warmth, transparency, humor, and straightforward, faith-filled approach. She's a licensed parent and family educator, co-founder of 1 Corinthians 13 Parenting, author, parent consultant, speaker. She's a mentor mom with the Mom Initiative and Moms Together. She's spoken in Florida, California, Texas, Minnesota, and Colorado. Mostly, Lori is wife to Tom and mom of 4. The Wildenberg's home is nestled in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. Perfect day in Lori's world is a hike with her hubby, 5 kids, 4+ daughter-in-law, and a Labradoodle. So very exciting to have you on the program with us. Messy Journey, what a great title.
Thanks, Eric.
I've got a 27-year-old daughter myself, and I would say that if you describe the journey, it was kind of messy along the way. You've come into kind of what I would call a fullness, a real clarity of understanding of how to take your training and your calling and your experience as a parent and mold them together to give a 360-degree perspective on parenting. Was this your dream? Was this your goal? Was this your vision growing up to become the mom, the Labradoodle owner, and the author of, I believe this is your 5th book?
4th book.
This is your 4th one. Your first one on your own?
My first solo book, yes. Messy Journey is my first solo. I co-authored the other 3.
Wonderful. So what was the vision for young Lori growing up?
My vision was to be a teacher and a mom. And the Lord was good enough to let me see both of those things fulfilled. And so that was my vision growing up, and I always wanted to have 4 kiddos, and thankfully my husband felt the same way. And as life unfolded, I was going through infertility, and we had always wanted to adopt. So our plan was to have 3 children and then to adopt our 4th. God had different ideas, so we adopted our first, Courtney, who helped me write Messy Journey, and she's our first and oldest child. And then we had the other 3 the old-fashioned way.
How interesting.
So,
my daughter's adopted as well.
Oh, okay.
So I completely understand. And you know what's interesting, as I'm sure you have found out, having 3 biologicals and 1 adoptive, that there are unique design parameters, if you will, about the exchange, identity, relationship, questioning, things that are not in the normal lexicon of questions of parent to child. Between an adoptive parent and an adoptive child, there are those dynamics, and some of them, the answer brings a bigger question mark than it does any concrete information, because in many cases it's quite unknown.
You know, Eric, that's really true. And when I was, being a first-time parent and having my first little person be adopted, I really resisted thoughts like that. But that is actually true, and there's more of a struggle regarding issues of abandonment, which I believed that my love for her and the adoption, and my husband's love for her and the adoption, would completely cover that abandonment issue, which I'm sorry to say only the Lord can fill
Right.
that hole. I can't do that. I'm not sorry to say that, but it wasn't as I expected. So she had those, and I think too the idea of needing to have a little more control or power over her life that perhaps my other children didn't feel as much of a desire for that. For her, it was innate.
Was your daughter natural birth or C-section?
I think vaginal, but I'm not positive.
Okay, because my Amanda was a C-section baby, and that also carries with it a whole nother set of dynamics. And
Interesting.
so I began to have to navigate an understanding of the adopted child's psyche and the C-section child psyche, and it's very, very different. Now, she's my only, and we're incredibly close. We've navigated the waters, if you will, never leaving the ship, but at times being on complete opposite ends of the same ship. Maybe far enough apart that it didn't appear that we were even on the same vessel. So you had this vision, you had this idea that life was going to look a certain way, and you met someone who shared a common vision with you. You went and got an education in what it was you wanted to do, which was to teach, but you went a little bit further than that in your licensure as a counselor in family and parenting.
Parent and family educator, yes. Similar, but not actually counseling.
Okay. And did you work in that field in the school system
Yes.
or private
Yes.
practice?
Yes, both.
Did you find, and this isn't a set-up question because I found the same thing. I came out of the education world. I had a Bachelor of Science in Education. But when it came to counseling, I was a visionary and laser focused and could clearly identify in almost anyone else's life the challenge, the problem, and the very clear solution. Yet internally, I could see nothing, do nothing, say nothing, had no clarity whatsoever, and wrestled between desire, intellect, education, application, all of that became an internal struggle to search out answers when it was so easy. The 2 or 3 sessions with the family and things are on track and people are talking and life is good and the reports are coming back great, and I'm going home and facing what I'm facing and I have no clarity whatsoever. I don't know if that was your experience, but it certainly was mine.
Well, I think we're a little too close to the issues or to the concerns, and I think you actually really have to work at having a little bit more of a bird's eye view and to be able to receive feedback from your spouse and from other folks, and that's not always easy. So yeah, I understand what you're saying.
You know, it's interesting that we recommend counseling to a lot of couples, but people in ministry tend not to look at that as part of their arsenal. They look to books, they look to conferences, other interactions, but counseling is something that I highly recommend that allows you to really take advantage of what you yourself are offering when you're in the counseling field. So it's almost like by rejecting it, you diminish what you yourself provide, which doesn't make sense, but we tend to fall into that trap.
Yeah, we sure can. And it is so helpful to actually seek out help. So And we've found that with our messy journey, that we've been able to attend a group called Where Grace Abounds. And that group is a group of parents and people who are struggling in the area of sexuality and some other things. So, and we've been able to receive some really wise counsel, and it's been very helpful.
The years you've spent in the field, and then the other books that you were co-author on, were there recurring themes, foundational truths that seemed to permeated its way into our society as to a certain notion or way of us raising children that we adopt because that's how we were raised, or we repeat what it was that we experienced, we try to replicate, or in some cases intentionally do the opposite because we're trying not to be like what it was that we didn't enjoy and didn't like. But through the research and the experience of your other books, did you find some things that were shockingly kind of took the pattern and shook it up a little bit and said, hold on, we've got a standard way of viewing things that people have adopted over the years that is, it's not that it's bad, it's just a couple of degrees off. And over time and distance, a couple of degrees off causes you to miss your mark entirely. So as you were working in these other projects and your experience in the counseling area, did you find some truths that became evident to you that had to be shared?
Oh my gosh, such a good question. Yes, absolutely. When we were raising our kids when they were younger, the idea of pursuing more of a behavior modification, that was something that was really a situation that people were really looking at and applying in their families. And also the natural consequences, which are good, but they're not the best. They're not the best way to go. There's a better way, which is to include grace and some humility in that. And so over the course of studying and getting to know my kids and working with various parents, I realized that a lot of the strategies that I would use in the classroom were not the best strategies to use in my family, at least not as an ongoing situation. For certain things like behavior modification, when you're potty training somebody, that's a great thing to do, right? That's a really good way to go. But I'll give you an example. It's very simple, and it's really, I believe, really based in Scripture. So let's say, for instance, you're sitting at your kitchen table and your child spills his milk. And then the natural consequences would be, and it would make sense, to have the child go and clean up the milk, because that's the responsible thing to do with the natural consequences. But I would say, rather than doing just that, to raise the bar to some degree and to say, that's okay, so you normalize the spill. Everybody spills, so you put yourself and add some humility in there, and then I'll help you clean it up. So your child knows that you are walking alongside them in the quote-unquote spills of life. And that's the way that we started handling spills and let's say car accidents. We had 4 teenagers all at the same time. That we would let them know that we were not shooting for them to be necessarily independent. We were shooting more for a relationship, connection, and interdependence with responsibility combined. So that's really my philosophy, is to make sure that we're raising our kids to be in a family that can support and encourage each other in the good times and the hard times, but yet to, I don't think we really want to raise independent kids, because now that my kids are young adults, I still want to be a part of their life. And yet I do want responsible adults. And I think what we mean to say is we want responsible children that we're still connected to. And to me, that's interdependence, not codependence.
Was this something that you learned, observed, or was this your experience in your home growing up, that you had models that helped you see that there's a way to coach versus correct? There is a way to engage as opposed to punish. There are other ways to deliver the message, and just because the message, the content of the message does not change, the delivery mechanism does.
Absolutely.
Was this something that you experienced, something that came through your education, or was this something that you, like all the rest of us, learned through trial and error, the hard way, the easy way? How did it come to you?
I think maybe perhaps through all those various venues, growing up and then being in the educational system, and then seeing how that is different than raising kids. And I think a lot is experiential, and a lot is through study. And my second and third co-authored books, Raising Little Kids with Big Love and Raising Big Kids with Supernatural Love, those two books were developed by studying 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, the chapter that most people would have at their wedding.
Yes.
And this is, that was really, I think, the beginning of me really being able to put words around what I was observing.
You know, it's interesting you bring up 1 Corinthians 13. We absolutely use that in premarital and marital counseling. We absolutely use that from the pulpit as the framework for how to treat our spouses, interrelations with other people, looking at a model or as an example of one to another. Yet, in looking at Messy Journey, at looking at your ministry, at looking at your messaging, we have somewhat shortchanged ourselves as parents by looking at 1 Corinthians 13 as the model for spouse or adult relationship, where it is a universal model for any relationship, family, friend, child. Look, and I'm going to throw it in there, pet. If you don't treat your pet lovingly, patiently, and kindly, and not easy, then you're going to have a pet. So when God laid out for us this amazing picture of what love looked like, we, whether or not it was the ministry, the seminary, or we as just Bible studying individuals, have seemed to have pigeonholed 1 Corinthians 13 to be defined for adult human interaction. Love is defined this way. And yet, at the very core of your ministry, which is named 1 Corinthians 13 Parenting Ministry, you've taken this concept of 1 Corinthians 13 and applied it to parenting, to family dynamic. Now, here it is, 2017. Corinthians was written, let's say, 1900 and some years ago. Have we been missing the boat for almost 2,000 years on this incredible parameter-setting guideline? We've allowed the Dr. Spocks and all the other parenting manuals to replace a paragraph, a chapter, and a verse, and a group of verses in the Bible that sum up exactly what our dynamic is supposed to be in our family relationships, not just husband to wife. How did this happen?
I don't know. I don't know, but we sure like to have it read at weddings, and it's a great place to have that read. But I do think it is an overarching way of living. And like you said, overall, I mean, at 1 Corinthians 13 parenting, of course, we apply it directly to parenting, but it's hopefully a way for us to embrace life and a way for us to interact with our neighbor as well. So, yeah, I think that it's interesting that it's been so narrowly applied when it really is a template for all relationships, all human relationships, because that is how the Lord deals with us.
And that is the parameter. You know, when I first came to faith, I have the same Bible. It's all now beat up, tattered, torn, and I refuse to give it up. It's the very first New Testament that I ever had. It's Jewish. I'm 44 years old. I come to faith, and I get my first New Testament. You know, this is going to be with me for forever. And when it came to 1 Corinthians 13, I was reading it for the first time, and I'm circling everything and highlighting it, and I'm putting in the margin, if somebody doesn't love me like this, then they don't love me. And so I wrote that all over the margin. I was thinking, wow, I finally have a way of really seeing, really navigating the world. I'm a middle-aged man. I'm a parent. I'm successful in the world. But all of a sudden now I get this, okay, now I've got a hard line. If they're not patient, they don't love me. If they're not kind, they don't love me. If they're easily angered, they don't love me. And then all of a sudden I go to Bible study, and then I go on to advanced Bible study, and then I go on to seminary-like training, to yeshiva training, and become ordained, and go through all that. And now all that's scratched out. Okay? It's all, if I don't love like this, then I'm not loving. If I'm not patient, then I'm not showing. All of a sudden, everything's changed and completely switched around for me, because the initial reading for me, it was one way, which was the self, as opposed to the other way, which is the Messiah-like behavior. So it's quite a fascinating change in perspective. We're talking with Lori Wildenberg, author of Messy Journey, How Grace and Truth Offer the Prodigal a Way Home. The words in this book are for any of you who are wanting to repair, renew, refresh, begin again. That relationship that for whatever reason, whatever the circumstances were, those words always ring true. We all did the best we could at the time with what we knew. But here we are years later, and we look back, and that's our response. We did the best we could with what we knew. That is not the final chapter. That statement does not end in a period. That statement ends in a colon. And this is the other side of the colon. This takes you from you did the best you could do to what can I do now? What principles can I apply? As I look back on what got us here, I can answer the question, how did I get here? But for many of us, not just the prodigal child, but the parent of the prodigal child, the prodigal parent, has now a resource that's going to take them through transparent ways to move things from fear to faith, move yourself and the ones you care so much about that you're willing now to do the work, that you've made the decision it's never too late. Messy Journey, Lori Wildenberg. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support. but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're visiting with Lori Wildenberg, author of Messy Journey, How Grace and Truth Offer the Prodigal a Way Home. Lori, welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much, Eric.
Messy Journey is your messy journey. This is as autobiographical as it is biblically revelatory. It is your journey with Courtney, your adopted first, and what an amazing accomplishment that Courtney was a part of this, telling the story, that you two have arrived at a point through the conflict, the flare-ups, the "you're not my mother," to every one of those comments that we as adoptive parents hear, the lexicon, they'll tell you you're going to hear this the first time you ever hear it. It pierces the heart as if you've never thought you'd hear it. There's no preparation for some of these encounters. Yet the two of you have taken a look at who you are, who you were, who you wanted to be, and figuring out a way to get there. In this process, have you found that the candor, the honest dialogue, the revisiting of some of the contributing events that are portrayed in the book brought even deeper healing, and that you are at a point of closeness today through that dialogue that you might not have ever been able to obtain any other way?
Yeah, I think God's really used this in a powerful way in our relationship and also with other people. And in Messy Journey, the story that is woven through, as you say, is Courtney's journey and my journey together. Yet the book also addresses any type of prodigal, and there are lots of stories from dozens of other families included in there. And in addition to that, lots of prodigals, their voices are in the book as well, and some post-prodigals, shall we say, ones that have actually returned back home. And so what I've discovered in the process of writing this book is that although the details are unique to each story, the principles and the journey is fairly similar, no matter if you are dealing with a young person who has wandered due to substance abuse or to maybe sexual sin, or let's say cohabitation. It's or denying their faith, walking the road of pursuing an atheism sort of a faith rather than the Christian faith with which they were brought up with. So what we've really discovered is that this has been not just healing for Courtney and for me, but oh my goodness, Eric, I got an email just the other day from a daughter, and she wrote me to tell me that she and her mom are going through a messy journey together, and the daughter wrestled with a lot of substance abuse, and she walked away from her faith. And her mother was, of course, devastated, and the mother blamed herself for her daughter's journey. And when in the daughter writing this, she let me know, which was such a wonderful blessing to hear this, that this book has, they've been going through it chapter by chapter together and discussing it. And she said it has been really healing for their relationship. So God is using it bigger than just for me and Courtney. He has actually expanded that to other families' relationships. And actually, no matter where they are on the journey, because I have had other parents who do not have the blessing of their child back and going through a book together, yet they're going through it alone, and they're struggling with some things, but yet they've come to realize that the journey perhaps may be one that the Lord is allowing to get the child to where He wants them to be further down the road. So with the hope that those kids are working out their testimony, that to always have hope in what appears to be the hopeless.
People are prone not to share and to live in guilt and shame and the darkness that goes along with this assessment. My child has wandered. I don't want to tell anybody because they're going to look at me and view me as a bad parent, view me as what did I do? What did I do to that child? So we hear a lot of excuses. They've moved away, they're away at school, they couldn't make it home, they had a final. We hear all the answers, but over time you begin to wonder, or you actually don't, but to the parent, they never stop wondering, they never stop hoping, they never stop desiring. And you've given them an opportunity in the privacy of their own struggle to address many of these feelings that they have and to find comfort in Scripture and through the lessons that you share that there is hope, that this is not the final battle is not over until God says it's over, and that this shame, this guilt, this fear is a trap that the adversary, the enemy, wants to keep you in, because if you were to mount up and you were to be proactive and you were to be engaging in many of the principles that you present in the book, that your victory may come much sooner, but you have to get engaged. You can't wish this problem away. You cannot hide the issue. It's got to be acknowledged internally, even if the revelation is, it is entirely my fault. I made these mistakes. I was an alcoholic. I was a drug user. I was a philanderer. I was this. I was that. The Lord forgives. Now what do you do on the path to restoration? And Messy Journey takes you through that process of understanding, acknowledging, accepting, and then what's the strategy? How do you pray? What do you pray? How do you forgive? How does 1 Corinthians 13 apply in this case? It took for some a lifetime, 20, 25, 30 years to get to this point. This is not an instant fix. This is the first one that needs healing is not your child. The first one that needs healing is you and your relationship with God. And once you're in harmony, once you're in partnership doing with the Lord, then you have the battle plan laid out before you. What were some of the things that were most revelatory to you, personally touching, that were surprising, that Courtney shared with you, or you shared with Courtney, or the two of you discovered together in Messy Journey?
What was really surprising to me is that when there was a period of time when Courtney and we were estranged for a period of time where she was living with her significant other, which would be another woman. And that relationship was highly toxic. And her partner at the time did not want her to have contact with our family. And that was the most painful part of our journey. I wasn't 100% sure where she was living, but I knew where she worked. And so I would go to her place of work fairly often as I felt it was God leading me there. And when I would go, she was a cashier, and so she was a little bit of a captive audience. And so I would go to her place of work, and I wouldn't stay long. I would just say, I love you, and I miss you, and I'm never giving up. And as it turns out, the Lord used that time for great healing. And over the period of a few months, I guess I would say, having me show up and exhibit real emotion and real love without guilt, but just that I miss you and I love you and I'm never giving up. That gave her the courage to move out of the relationship because she knew she could always come home. And I didn't realize how impactful that was. And that was one of the things that surprised me. Another thing where another situation where God really showed up in a huge way, I had been at the doctor with my middle daughter. And in the waiting room, we were talking to a woman who we both knew a little bit, more of an acquaintance. And she was saying that her daughter had been killed by the daughter's husband. And she told her story. And I was moved from that moment on to write a blog about toxic relationships and signs of abuse and what to be aware of. And so I prayed, Lord, let Courtney see these signs, this blog, so that she's able to read this and understand that the relationship she's in is unhealthy. And I wrote the blog, and again, we were estranged at the time. Well, the first miracle was she called me that day and wanted to go out for lunch. And of course, I met her. And the blog had already gone out, and it had already at that point had over 500 hits. But the one hit I wanted it to have, right, was my daughter. And so we went out for lunch, and the second miracle was that she asked me, because typically a young adult won't say this to their mom, hey mom, how's the blogging going?
Right.
And so I said, oh, one just went out that's been pretty well received. Would you like to read it? And she said, sure. So I pulled it up on my phone, and in the safety of the restaurant, with me being able to see that she was actually reading this, it was a complete God miracle. And she read it, and I was able to keep my mouth shut, which I have to say is another miracle. That was very hard not to say something. I didn't say anything, and she handed me my phone back, and she goes, huh, and that's all she said. And then I just prayed, okay, Lord, take this and use this. And then after Courtney returned home, I asked her about that blog and if it had impacted her. And she said that it had, and that those words kept rolling around in her brain, and that she realized this relationship was not God's best for her. So there have been a few surprising things along the way.
Who did you write this book for?
You know, it's actually written for people who are in that hard place. Even though it was healing for me and for Courtney, I believe that a writer needs to write for the reader, because that's who needs to hear it. It's for connection, so that people are able to know, hey, I'm not alone. And as you said earlier, Eric, so many people are suffering in silence, and it's due to shame and to grief and to guilt and anger, and it's important for them to know they aren't alone. And we are so willing to share when our kids are little. If we're struggling with, let's say kids not listening, perhaps, we're willing to talk about that. But what happens when the not listening turns into the wandering away from a faith and from a value and from a family system and morals that you have raised your child with? We become very shamed, because we believe that we've done our part. We raised them up according to the way we believe that the Lord would have us, and then the child wandered off. So we wonder why, and if we can assign blame, or we don't want to share a concern with other people that we're going through this, when in fact, probably many, if not most people, have a child, at least one, that goes through a season of wandering. And I think it's really important for us to be able to, as the body of Christ, be a little more transparent and to reach out and to help each other on this messy journey, because it isn't easy, and the Lord designed us for a relationship. He designed us to love each other. And one way to love each other is to be able to assist somebody else, or to be honest in the situation that you're in, so that you can get assistance from another, so that we can actually be the hands and feet of Jesus.
It's so often the story of the prodigal son is told. The context of it goes back to an old Jewish concept of basically the message is to the father, I wish you were dead, so that I could have my portion of the inheritance. And no one wants to hear, I wish you were dead. But yet, there are times in our rearing of children that we hear the I hate you, I wish you were dead, the venom that comes from woundedness, and we don't understand it, but yet we wind up becoming engaged in it because we believe that's our role as a parent, to naturally engage in that, or to exert our position. And what you've done in a messy journey is you've kind of changed the dynamic a little bit. You have moved into a deeper understanding of the role, the relationship, and the path to take in order to bring about restoration. It is a book that is filled with godly wisdom and godly advice, but it's also something that has been tried, it has been proven, it has been tested, and it is words of comfort, first and foremost, to every parent that's out there, that others have gone through the same thing. It was important enough for the Lord to include it in the Bible. Let's not make this about just a parable. This is real life. Mm-hmm. And we have a real set of instructions, and there's real wisdom here. You mentioned that in earlier books you had references to various resources, and you do provide those in this book. You do in the appendix have a prodigal chart, some of the characteristics, some of the biblical examples. You add in here 13 indicators of trouble, 20 signs of substance abuse, 10 warning signs of abuse, 6 parenting tips for your non-prodigal, 4 respect rules, areas of group discussion. The one thing we did not have time to talk about, but let's take a minute to do so, is you have 3 other children. And while dealing with the prodigal can be such an incredible focus, the 3 other children are a part of this picture. How do you keep them from feeling neglected, feeling less important, feeling less engaged, and how do you engage them?
Oh, such a good question, because when you have a prodigal, you are right. They take a lot of energy. They probably take some financial support. Typically, there's usually a financial piece of that. So, yeah, they take a lot of resources. And my husband and I decided sort of early on that the prodigal issues were not going to be, although we were certainly all in as far as what we could do to help her, it was not going to be our whole life, and that we couldn't lose all the other kids in the process. And so we were very careful to make sure that, here's my dog Murphy, we were very careful to make sure that we spent time with the kids, that our life didn't revolve around the prodigal issue. That was and still is very important to us. And all of our kids need to know that we are all in and we are there for them. And as I mentioned before, Eric, it's an interdependent system. So not only do my children rely on Tom and rely on me, but they also rely on one another. And so they are very good at reaching out and drawing each other back to the family. And so, yeah, that you have to be very intentional not to let your marriage or your relationship with your other kids or your kids' relationship with one another be something that is going to go ahead and impact or be the collateral damage from the prodigal situation. You really have to care for that. So,
thank you for that. We've been talking with Lori Wildenberg, author of the newly released book, Messy Journey, How Grace and Truth Offer the Prodigal a Way Home. Tremendous wisdom based on experience and a joint venture between a prodigal child and the mother, who blogged her home, prayed her home, visited her home, loved her home, and their journey together, which is a journey that you too can have. You do not have to live in defeat. You do not have to live and suffer without any game plan, without any way other than just prayer. And not that prayer is not incredibly important, but faith without works. And to understand how to put hands and feet to the faith that you have that God will ultimately bring that child home. But there's a role for you to play. But you have to understand who you are. You have to understand what the circumstances are. And you need to understand what you can do actively, which will bring you great comfort that you're no longer helpless and hopeless, but you are now equipped. Messy Journey, Lori Wildenberg. Go to ignitingnation.com, click on Books and Media, go to Messy Journey, click on that, get this book right now. We've got a wonderful opportunity for you to join together, maybe with a resounding silent world out there of so many families struggling with what to do and how to do it, and searching for answers. There's an answer right here for you. Lori Wildenberg, thank you for sharing this story with us, and may the Lord continue to bless you and Courtney and your other children and your husband in continuing to build on the success of this. And I look forward to the next chapter, the next book, that talks about how we got from there to where. Thank you so much for being with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thank you so much for having me, Eric.
You're very welcome. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.